Hello there, everyone. My name is Jimmy Mack, and welcome back to the 9th Academic Podcast. This is going to be the NS2 textbook Maritime History, Chapter 2, The American Revolution. So, after Britain was doing their colonizing thing, as we discussed at the end of the previous podcast, they made these colonies, 13 of them, in fact, over in America, or North America specifically. And then they started treating them badly, whatever, yada yada, you know the whole story. Point is, we did a revolution. Now, the key events for the start of this revolution are the Boston Massacre, in which there was a scuffle between Americans and British soldiers, in which they fired on the crowd and 5 Americans were killed, as well as the Boston Tea Party, which was a protest against tea taxes, in which a whole bunch of tea was dumped into the ocean, which makes it not good. I mean, I wish we could turn the entire ocean into tea, but unfortunately there was not enough tea to brew the entire Atlantic Ocean, which is a shame, but it was still a pretty cool event. Anyway, Britain thinks they have the naval upper hand because they have ships and America doesn't, but then they realize that actually they were getting most of their shipbuilding supplies like wood and tar from the colonies that are now in a war against them, so they're going to be having a lot more trouble doing that sort of thing, and in the meantime the colonies can start building their ships. They can also start doing privateering, as well as just defending their thousands of miles of coastline, which, come to think of it, was another pretty bad thing for the British. They were just not having a good time militarily at the start of this war. Anyway, the U.S. Navy is born on 13 October 1775, where the Continental Congress approves a plan for just buying 2 ships, the Andrew Doria and the Cabot, and fitting them out to intercept supply ships. As well, Washington, who has just taken command of the army, a little later, commissions 7 of his own ships, which were called Washington's Navy. A little later, in November 10th of the same year, the Continental Congress established a Marine Corps of 2 battalions, which is the Marine Corps' birthday. On the other hand, we did lack a whole bunch of crew for our ships, and sometimes we had to resort to impressment, which is we basically take people on board ships from other ships and force them to serve in our Navy. The first ever naval squadron from the continent was a whole bunch of stuff, various schooners, brigs, and sloops under Esek Hopkins. And he, at one point, took him down to Nassau, or New Providence, which was over in the Bahamas, and captured 2 British forts and then a whole bunch more British ships, as long as all the stuff on them. Generally had a very successful time. His later missions didn't go so well, though, and eventually they stopped sending out the squadron. What we did send out, though, was a lot more individual ships and stuff in order to do individual battles that way, usually by officers who'd been in the squadron. Officers such as Lieutenant John Paul Jones. He had a sloop called the Providence, and in a single month of August 1776, he captured 16 British vessels and destroyed a whole bunch more. And he was generally just kicking butt out there for the Union. And so, yeah, he's a naval legend now. There's a monument to him over in Washington, D.C. It's pretty cool. Now we come to the Battle of Lake Champlain. So the context for this is that we've got a whole bunch of American ships trying to get into Canada in order to convince the Canadians to fight against the British. But the British are winning and pushing us back out of Canada. And so General Benedict Arnold and some ships of his are on the run, and they're heading down from Quebec into Vermont and New York. And so when they make it to Lake Champlain, they decide to turn around and start fighting again, because instead of a river, they're at a lake, so they can do the best they can. They have 16 ships, but the British have a lot more. So what Benedict Arnold does is he hides his ships behind an island and lets the British pass them by, and then they turn around and come down south from the windward side. And so now they're attacking from the side of the wind, as well as from behind, and the British have to turn around and fight upwind. This was not exactly a decisive American victory, but it did halt the British advance, and so it was like, it sort of turned the tide on that British advance, and this is called the First Battle of Lake Champlain to differentiate it from another battle over in Lake Champlain during the War of 1812. In the meantime, the British forces pushed out from the Battle of Bunker Hill sailed over to New York to join with some other forces, and they captured it, and it would remain in British control for the rest of the war. While they were there, they were like, hey, let's expand our territory. Let's expand the amount of control we have. So they pushed out into a bit of Rhode Island, into some of New Jersey, but they didn't push past the Delaware River. And so Washington's like, they're not going to be expecting an attack on Christmas morning. So he rows across the river with a whole bunch of American soldiers, and then surprise attacks a camp, and we managed to take back most of New Jersey from that. Now for the turning point in the war, Saratoga. So, the British general, John Burgoyne, is advancing southward after capturing Fort Ticonderoga, and he's basically heading down from Canada after all the stuff going on with the Battle of Lake Champlain. But he keeps pushing, and now he's sort of isolated, and he's sort of in upstate New York, and he's in trouble because his supply line's super stretched out. Supply lines are a big deal, as you've probably noticed by now. And so he's just kind of getting harassed by a whole bunch of U.S. forces, and so he launches a desperate counterattack. Long story short, it doesn't work out. He ends up surrendering to General Benedict Arnold of the Union. This is the turning point of the war, not only because the British lost a whole bunch of firepower, but also because this battle convinced the French to join us, and that gave us a whole bunch more, and this allowed us to win the war. However, after the war was nearly over, the French were like, okay, we're done here, and then they bailed, except for the fact that the British were like, oh, they're gone now, and immediately took over most of South Carolina. There was a combined American and French attack on that, but it failed, and they managed to hold it for a couple of months until just some locals, some military managed to take it right back over. And so we forced Cornwallis out of Georgia and over to a whole bunch of different places, eventually resulting in the Battle of Yorktown, where he unconditionally surrendered and the war was over. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Thank you all so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.